Matt Damon sat across from Robin Williams during the filming of Good Will Hunting, trying to stay in character. But halfway through Robin's monologue about his dead wife, Matt started crying for real. Not acting, actually crying. Because Robin had just shared something so personal, so raw, that Matt forgot they were making a movie. It was day 31 of filming Good Will Hunting, a small independent movie with a modest budget and huge ambitions. The film was Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's passion project, a script they'd been writing together for years, a story about a troubled genius from South Boston who couldn't escape his own self-destructive patterns. They'd managed to get Robin Williams attached to play Sean Maguire, the therapist who would help Will Hunting face his demons. It was a coup for the young filmmakers. Robin was one of the biggest stars in Hollywood, and he'd agreed to work for scale, minimum union wages, because he believed in the script and wanted to help two unknown actors get their movie made. But Robin had one unusual request when he signed on. He wanted permission to improvise. This wasn't completely surprising. Robin Williams was famous for his improvisational genius. His stand-up comedy was almost entirely improvised. His performances in films like Mrs. Doubtfire and Aladdin were filled with off-script moments that made it into the final cuts. But Good Will Hunting wasn't a comedy. It was a serious drama about trauma, abuse, and healing. The script was carefully crafted, with specific dialogue meant to land specific.
What nobody expected was how deep Robin would go. The scene they were filming that day was one of the most important in the entire movie. It was the park bench scene, the moment where Sean Maguire, the therapist, finally breaks through Will's defenses by sharing something vulnerable about his own life. In the script, Sean was supposed to tell Will about his late wife. The dialogue was beautiful, talking about love and loss and the imperfect beauty of real human connection. Matt and Ben had worked hard on those lines, polishing them until every word felt right. They shot the scripted version first. It was good, professional, emotionally effective. Matt delivered his lines perfectly. Robin hit all the right notes. Gus Van Sant called cut and told everyone it was a solid take. But then Robin said, "Can we do one more? I want to try something." Matt Damon settled back into his position on the park bench. The camera rolled. Robin started the scene the same way, following the script about his wife and their relationship. And then, about 2 minutes in, Robin went completely off script. He started telling a story that wasn't in the screenplay. He started talking about his wife farting in her sleep.
The entire crew went silent. This was supposed to be a touching, emotional scene about love and loss. And Robin Williams was talking about flatulence. But the way Robin told it, with such genuine warmth, such specific detail, such obvious love for this woman he was describing, it wasn't crude. It was beautiful. It was real. It was the kind of intimate, embarrassing human detail that you only share about someone you truly loved. Robin described lying in bed next to his wife, being woken up by this sound, and instead of being disgusted, being overwhelmed with love for this imperfect human person sleeping next to him. He talked about how she'd deny it in the morning, how they'd argue about it playfully, how it became this running joke between them. Matt Damon, sitting across from Robin, was supposed to be maintaining his character, the defensive, emotionally guarded Will Hunting who deflected every genuine moment with sarcasm. But Matt wasn't acting anymore. He was listening to Robin Williams share something so vulnerable, so personally specific, that it was impossible to stay in character. Matt's eyes started to well up with tears. His throat tightened. He tried to hold it together, tried to remember he was supposed to respond with Will's typical defense mechanisms. But he couldn't.
The tears came anyway. Real tears. Not the manufactured tears of an actor hitting his mark, but genuine emotional response to witnessing someone's humanity laid bare. And Robin kept going. He talked about how his wife had been his soulmate, but not in the perfect, romanticized way movies usually portray. She was his soulmate because he knew all her flaws, all her imperfections, all her embarrassing human moments. And he loved her more because of them, not despite them. He talked about how she used to paint and how she wasn't particularly good at it, but she'd paint anyway because it made her happy. He talked about how she'd get paint in her hair and wouldn't notice for hours. He talked about how she died and how the last thing he thought about wasn't the big romantic moments they'd shared, but the small, stupid, ordinary things. The way she hummed while doing dishes, the way she always lost her keys, the way she'd fall asleep during movies and then insist she'd been awake the whole time. Every detail Robin shared made the story more specific, more real, more devastating. And Matt Damon sat there, tears streaming down his face, completely unable to maintain the emotional wall that his character was supposed to have. The camera kept rolling. The crew was absolutely silent. Nobody moved. Everyone understood they were witnessing something extraordinary.
When Robin finally finished the monologue, there was a long silence. Matt Damon couldn't speak. He was crying too hard. Robin reached over and put his hand on Matt's shoulder, a gesture that wasn't in the script but felt completely natural in the moment. Gus Van Sant called cut very quietly, almost reluctantly, like he didn't want to break the spell of what had just happened. The set remained silent for a full 10 seconds. Then someone, nobody remembers who, started clapping. And then everyone was clapping. The camera operators, the sound technicians, the production assistants, everyone. Matt Damon wiped his eyes and looked at Robin. Was any of that true? Robin smiled that sad Robin Williams smile. Parts of it. Later, Matt would learn that Robin had been married 3 times. His first marriage had ended in divorce. His second marriage, to Marcia Garces, was his current one in 1997 when they filmed Good Will Hunting. The wife he described in such loving detail wasn't someone who died. She was a composite, pieces of real memories, pieces of imagination, pieces of the person Robin wished he could have been in his relationships.
But the emotion was real. The vulnerability was real. The understanding of love and loss and human imperfection was absolutely real. And that's what had broken through Matt's professional armor. He hadn't been crying because he was a good actor performing sadness. He'd been crying because Robin Williams had just shown him what it means to be courageously vulnerable, to share the small, embarrassing, beautiful truths that make us human. When they watched the playback later, Gus Van Sant noticed something. During Robin's improvised monologue, Matt had completely forgotten to deliver any of his scripted lines. He just sat there, listening, reacting, being present. His only line in the entire 5-minute take was at the very end when he whispered, "So when did you know?" And Robin, still improvising, had responded, "I knew the moment she died because I missed her farts." It was a perfect moment, profound and absurd at the same time, deep and funny, exactly the tonal balance that Good Will Hunting needed, the understanding that real life contains both heartbreak and humor, often in the same breath. Gus Van Sant made a decision right there. He was using the improvised take. The scripted version was good, but the improvised version was transcendent. It was the heart of the entire movie. But there was a problem. The camera had been slightly out of focus during part of Robin's monologue. Technically, they should reshoot it.
Gus approached Robin and Matt and explained the situation. "The take was incredible, but we've got a focus issue. We should probably do it again." Robin shook his head. "We can't recreate that. That moment happened once. If we try to do it again, we'll be performing what just happened naturally. It won't be the same." Matt agreed. "I couldn't fake what I just felt. If we reshoot it, I'll know what's coming. It won't be real anymore." Gus thought about it for a moment, then made a choice that would define his career. "We're keeping it.
Slightly out of focus is better than perfectly focused but emotionally fake. That decision to preserve the authentic moment over technical perfection became one of the most important choices in the making of Good Will Hunting. The park bench scene became the emotional core of the film. It's the moment when Will Hunting finally lets his guard down, finally allows himself to be vulnerable, finally accepts that he deserves love and healing. And it works because Matt Damon's response is genuine. His tears aren't performed, they're real. His inability to maintain his character's defensive posture isn't a choice. It's an authentic reaction to witnessing Robin Williams' humanity.
When Good Will Hunting premiered at the Toronto Film Festival in 1997, that scene got a standing ovation. Critics singled it out as one of the most powerful moments in modern cinema. Audiences left the theater talking about it, quoting it, feeling changed by it. At the 1998 Academy Awards, Robin Williams won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor. It was his first and only Oscar win, despite decades of iconic performances. When he accepted the award, he thanked Matt and Ben for writing a beautiful script. But he didn't mention that some of his most powerful moments in the film weren't in that script at all. Backstage, after winning the Oscar, a reporter asked Robin about the park bench scene. That monologue about your wife, it's so specific, so personal. How did you prepare for that? Robin's answer was classic Robin Williams, deflective humor masking deeper truth. I just thought about all the things that make us human. We're all imperfect. We all fart. We all die. Might as well laugh and love in between. But later, in a more private interview, Robin said something more revealing. Matt's reaction in that scene is what makes it work. I could improvise all day, but if he hadn't responded with such genuine emotion, it would have been just me talking. He gave me permission to go deep because he was willing to go deep with me. That's not acting. That's trust. Matt Damon, for his part, has talked about that scene in dozens of interviews over the years. He's described it as one of the most formative experiences of his acting career. Robin taught me that day that the best acting isn't about performing what someone else is offering you. He offered me this incredibly vulnerable, honest moment, and all I had to do was be human enough to receive it. That's the lesson I've carried through every role since then. The scene also taught Matt and Ben, who won the Oscar for Best Original Screenplay, an important lesson about writing. Sometimes the most powerful moments in a story aren't the ones you plan. They're the ones that emerge when you create space for authentic human connection. In subsequent interviews about the screenwriting process, Ben Affleck talked about how the park bench scene changed their approach to writing. We used to think every line had to be perfect, every moment had to be precisely calibrated. But Robin showed us that if you create the right emotional space and if you trust your actors, they'll find truth that's deeper than anything you could write. The impact of that one improvised scene extended far beyond Good Will Hunting. It influenced how directors approached working with actors, how writers thought about dialogue, how the entire industry understood the balance between script and spontaneity. Gus Van Sant went on to direct several more films that relied heavily on improvisation and authentic moments. He'd credit Robin Williams and that park bench scene as the moment he learned to trust the unplanned. When Robin Williams died in 2014, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck both spoke publicly about what he'd meant to them. Matt specifically mentioned the park bench scene.
Robin didn't just help us make a good movie, Matt said. He taught us what it means to be brave as an artist, to share the embarrassing, imperfect, deeply human parts of yourself, and to trust that those are the parts that connect with people. I carry that lesson with me every single day. The park bench scene in Good Will Hunting has been studied in film schools, quoted in therapy sessions, referenced in countless other movies and TV shows. It's become shorthand for a particular kind of emotional breakthrough. The moment when someone finally stops performing and just tells the truth. And it almost didn't happen. If Robin Williams hadn't asked to improvise, if Gus Van Sant hadn't agreed, if Matt Damon hadn't been emotionally open enough to receive what Robin was offering, if the director hadn't chosen to keep the slightly out-of-focus take, if any one of those things had gone differently, the scene would have been good, but not great. Instead, it became legendary. A perfect example of what happens when preparation meets spontaneity, when technical skill meets emotional courage, when an actor is generous enough to share something real and another actor is present enough to receive it. The scene is about Sean Maguire telling Will Hunting that it's okay to be imperfect, that real love embraces flaws, that the small, embarrassing details of life are what make it worth living.
But the real story, the story behind the cameras, is about Robin Williams teaching a young actor that same lesson, that the most powerful art comes from being willing to be vulnerable, to share the truth, to trust that your humanity is enough. Matt Damon's tears in that scene weren't acting. They were recognition. Recognition that he was in the presence of someone who understood something profound about life and art, and who was generous enough to share it. That's the magic of Good Will Hunting. That's why that scene still makes audiences cry 27 years later. Not because the script was perfect, though it was good, but because two actors created a moment of authentic human connection, and the camera happened to be rolling. Robin Williams could have won an Oscar for a perfectly performed scripted scene. Instead, he won it for having the courage to go off script, to share something real, and to trust that the truth is always more powerful than the performance. And Matt Damon learned a lesson that day that shaped his entire career. The best acting happens when you stop acting and start listening, start feeling, start being present enough to let the truth in.
That's not a technique you can learn in acting class. That's a gift you receive from someone who's brave enough to give it. And on day 31 of filming Good Will Hunting, on a park bench in Boston, Robin Williams gave that gift to a young actor who was ready to receive it. The tears were real. The moment was real. And 27 years later, it still feels real every single time you watch it. That's the power of choosing truth over perfection. That's the legacy of Robin Williams. And that's why Good Will Hunting isn't just a good movie, it's a masterclass in what happens when artists are brave enough to stop performing and start being human.